The afternoon sun beat down on the small highway gas station as Lucas Chen pulled his modest blue sedan next to pump number 3. It was the kind of place most people just passed through. A single building with 4 pumps, a mini-mart, and a bathroom that Lucas hoped he wouldn't need to use. Lucas stepped out of his car and stretched his lanky frame. At 29 years old, he didn't look like much, thin with messy black hair that fell across his forehead, thick glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and a faded MIT hoodie despite the warm weather. He had been driving for 6 hours straight, making good time on his cross-country trip to visit his sister in Portland. As he inserted his credit card into the pump, Lucas's mind was elsewhere, still working on a coding problem from work. Even on vacation, he couldn't turn off the software engineer part of his brain that constantly solved puzzles. His fingers tapped an invisible keyboard as he muttered to himself about algorithm efficiency. Need to reduce the runtime complexity, he whispered, not noticing the stares from the only other customer, an older man filling up his pickup truck. The roar of motorcycle engines broke Lucas's concentration. 3 large bikes pulled into the station, the riders revving the engines louder than necessary before cutting them off. The bikes were all black and chrome with red flame details, and each had a patch on the back that read Road Demons with a skull logo. The leader was a large man with a bushy beard and arms covered in tattoos. People around these parts knew him as Wrench. The other 2 weren't much smaller, one with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek, the other with long greasy hair tied back in a ponytail. All 3 wore leather vests despite the heat. Lucas glanced up briefly, then returned to pumping his gas, adjusting his glasses and pulling out his phone to check his route. He was completely unaware of how the atmosphere had changed. Well, what do we have here? Wrench said loudly, looking directly at Lucas. Looks like a lost little computer boy. What's that shirt say? MIT. Must be important and tiny. His friends laughed on cue, their voices echoing across the quiet station. The old man who had been pumping gas quickly paid and drove away, not wanting any part of what was coming. The station attendant, a thin woman in her 50s named Betty, watched nervously from inside. She'd seen the road demons cause trouble before. They considered this highway their territory and often hassled travelers they thought looked weak or out of place. Lucas finally finished pumping his gas and replaced the nozzle. He needed to use the restroom and buy a coffee for the next leg of his journey. To do this, he would have to walk past the bikers who had positioned themselves between his car and the store entrance. "Excuse me," Lucas said politely, his voice softer than he intended. "I just need to get to the store." Wrench stepped directly in front of him, standing nearly a head taller. "Hear that, boys? He needs to get to the store. Well, this here is our gas station, and there's a toll for nerds passing through." The biker with the ponytail laughed and circled around behind Lucas. "Yeah, and the toll just went up because of that fancy college sweater." Lucas looked around. There was no one else in sight now except Betty, who was picking up the phone inside. He took a deep breath and pushed his glasses up his nose. "I don't want any trouble," he said calmly. "I'm just passing through." "Too late for that," Wrench replied, cracking his knuckles. "Trouble just found you, college boy." Lucas stood perfectly still as the 3 bikers closed in around him. His eyes moved quickly, taking in every detail. Wrench directly in front, the bald biker with the scar to his right, and ponytail guy behind him. Inside the store, Betty was speaking urgently into the phone, probably calling the police. "I think $50 should cover your toll," Wrench said, holding out a large, calloused hand. His breath smelled of cigarettes and cheap beer. "I don't carry cash," Lucas replied simply, his voice steadier than before. Something in his tone made the bald biker pause for just a second. Wrench laughed. "Then I guess we'll have to take something else." He reached for Lucas's phone, still in his hand. Lucas took a small step back. "That's not going to happen." "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it? 4 eyes?" Wrench mocked, looking back at his friends for approval. They laughed on cue, but the bald one's laugh sounded a bit forced. The station was silent except for the distant sound of cars passing on the highway. No one was stopping. The sun continued to beat down, making sweat run down the back of Lucas's neck. "Last chance," Lucas said quietly. "Just let me go into the store, and we can all go our separate ways." This made all 3 bikers laugh even harder. Ponytail guy stepped closer and poked Lucas hard in the chest. You hear this guy? Last chance, he says. Wrench grabbed the front of Lucas's MIT hoodie and pulled him forward. Listen, smart guy, you don't get to give chances around here. We do. As Wrench's fist tightened on his hoodie, something changed in Lucas's eyes. They became focused, cold, and calculating. His shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly, and his stance shifted just slightly. Get your hand off me, Lucas said, his voice now flat and commanding. The sudden change confused Wrench for just a moment, enough time for Lucas to carefully remove his glasses with his free hand and place them in his pocket. What's this? Taking off your glasses so they don't break when I hit you. Wrench laughed, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Betty came out of the store and called from a safe distance. I called the cops. They're on their way. Plenty of time to teach this nerd a lesson, Wrench called back, not taking his eyes off Lucas. And you can tell him he started it. The bald biker pulled out a small knife from his pocket and flicked it open. Let's just take his wallet and car keys. We can be gone before the cops show up. Lucas sighed, almost as if he was disappointed. I was really hoping to avoid this. Avoid what? Honeytail guy laughed. Getting your ass kicked. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he stared directly into Wrench's eyes with an intensity that made the bigger man blink. It was the look of someone who had seen things, bad things, and wasn't afraid anymore. In that moment, Wrench felt a flicker of doubt. This skinny nerd didn't seem scared enough. Something wasn't right. You know what? Lucas said, his voice now completely different, lower, more authoritative. I think there's something you should know before you make a huge mistake. Oh yeah? What's that? Wrench sneered, trying to hide his growing unease. Lucas's lips formed a thin smile that never reached his eyes. That MIT hoodie? I only wear it because my other one says U.S. Army Special Forces, and it tends to scare people. For the first time, real uncertainty flashed across Wrench's face as he processed what Lucas had just said. You're bluffing, the bald biker said, but his knife hand trembled slightly. Am I? Lucas asked. Want to find out? The tension at the gas station grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Wrench still had his fist bunched in Lucas's hoodie, but his confident sneer had faded into something more cautious. The three bikers exchanged quick glances, silently debating whether Lucas was telling the truth. Special Forces? Wrench laughed, but it sounded hollow. Yeah, right. You expect us to believe that? Lucas didn't blink. I don't really care what you believe. I'm giving you a chance to walk away. The bald biker with the scar took a small step back. Something about Lucas's calm demeanor was starting to feel wrong. Most people showed fear by now, shaking, pleading, or trying to run. This skinny guy was doing none of that. Show us some proof then, tough guy, Honeytail demanded, though he too had created a bit more distance. Lucas sighed. I've been out for 3 years. I don't carry my military ID around anymore. See, he's lying, Wrench said, finding his confidence again. He gave Lucas's hoodie a harder tug. Just a scared little nerd trying to sound tough. Without warning, Lucas moved. It was so fast that Ponytail Guy barely saw it happen. One moment Wrench had a grip on Lucas's hoodie, and the next, Lucas had broken the hold with a simple twist of his arm. He now stood 2 steps back, his stance completely transformed. What the? Wrench started, looking down at his empty hand in confusion. 3 tours, Lucas said calmly. Afghanistan and Syria. I was part of a 12-man team specializing in hostage rescue and direct action missions. The way he stood now made them believe him. His feet were positioned perfectly for balance, hands relaxed but ready at his sides. His eyes continuously scanned all 3 men, missing nothing. This was not the posture of the awkward nerd they cornered minutes ago. I left that life behind to build software instead of taking lives, Lucas continued. I haven't had to use these skills in years, and I'd really prefer to keep it that way. Betty watched from the doorway of the store, her phone still in hand. She had expected to see the skinny guy getting beaten up by now. Instead, the 3 bikers looked uncertain, and the young man seemed completely in control. He's still outnumbered 3-1, the bald biker said, gripping his knife tighter. Special Forces or not. Lucas actually smiled at that. True, but those aren't great odds for you. Wrench's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. He couldn't back down now in front of his friends. "Get him!" he shouted, lunging forward with a wild punch aimed at Lucas's face. Lucas moved like water. He sidestepped the punch with minimal effort, using Wrench's own momentum to guide him forward and off balance. As Wrench stumbled past, Lucas delivered a single, precise strike to the back of his knee that sent the large biker crashing to the pavement. Ponytail Guy rushed in next, swinging a chain he had pulled from his belt. Lucas ducked under it, stepped inside the biker's reach, and struck him twice, once in the solar plexus and once at a pressure point in his shoulder. The chain clattered to the ground as Ponytail's arm went temporarily numb. The bald biker hesitated, knife in hand, watching his two friends groaning on the ground after just seconds of fighting. Lucas hadn't even broken a sweat. "Still want to see my military ID?" Lucas asked quietly. In the distance, the sound of police sirens began to grow louder. Betty had stepped fully outside now, watching the scene with her mouth open in shock. The bald biker looked at his fallen friends, then at Lucas, then at the knife in his hand. For the first time, you realized just how badly they had misjudged the situation. "You have about 30 seconds to decide what happens next," Lucas said, his voice steady and his eyes never leaving the knife. Slightly as he gripped the knife, his eyes darted between Lucas and his two friends who were still struggling to get up. The sirens grew louder, maybe just a minute or two away now. "Drop it," Lucas said in a voice that expected to be obeyed. It was the same tone he had used with new recruits and in crisis situations overseas, calm but leaving no room for argument. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Then slowly, reluctantly, the bald biker lowered the knife. "Kick it away," Lucas instructed. The biker hesitated, then kicked the knife under a nearby car. Wrench had managed to get back on his feet, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "This isn't over," he growled, though he kept his distance now. Ponytail was still on one knee, trying to get feeling back in his arm. "Actually, it is," Lucas replied. "Police are almost here. You can either be arrested for assault, or you can get on your bikes and leave. Your choice." Betty watched from her position by the store, cell phone still in hand. Other customers who had been hiding in their cars or inside the mini-mart were now cautiously coming out to watch the scene unfold. Wrench spat on the ground. "You think you're so tough? We know this area. We'll find you." Lucas shook his head. "No, you won't. I'll be 2 states away by tomorrow. But if you really want to push this..." He let the sentence hang unfinished. The bald biker grabbed Wrench's arm. "Man, let's just go. It's not worth it." Wrench shook him off. "No one makes me look like a fool." "You did that yourself," Lucas replied evenly. Something in Lucas's steady gaze made Wrench pause. There was no fear there, no uncertainty, just a cold readiness that spoke of someone who had faced far worse threats than 3 bikers at a gas station. The police sirens were very close now, maybe just around the bend in the highway. "Last chance," Lucas said. "Leave now or deal with the cops." Ponytail had finally gotten to his feet, rubbing his arm. "Wrench, he's right. Let's roll." Wrench looked torn between his pride and the approaching sirens. Finally, with a string of curses, he backed toward his motorcycle. "This isn't over," he repeated, though his threat sounded hollow now. The 3 bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life. Wrench revved his extra loud, glaring at Lucas. "We'll remember your face," he shouted over the noise. Lucas simply watched them, his stance still ready but relaxed. "And I'll remember yours," he replied, just loud enough to be heard. With a final rev of engines, the 3 bikes peeled out of the gas station, disappearing down the highway in the opposite direction from the approaching police cars. Only when they were out of sight did Lucas's shoulders relax slightly. He walked over to where his glasses had been safely tucked in his pocket and put them back on, transforming back into the unassuming engineer. Betty approached him cautiously. "Are you really Special Forces?" Lucas smiled, and now it reached his eyes. "I was. Not anymore." "That was amazing," she said. "I've never seen anyone stand up to the road demons like that. They've been terrorizing people at this station for months." 2 police cars pulled into the station, lights flashing. Lucas sighed, knowing his quick stop for gas had just gotten a lot longer. "I just wanted some coffee," he said with a small smile. One of the customers who had been watching from inside the store approached. "I got the whole thing on video," the man said, holding up his phone. "Those guys have been bothering people around here for too long. You were incredible." Lucas looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I'd rather not be in any videos, if you don't mind." As the police officers got out of their cars and approached, Lucas took a deep breath. He had left that life behind for a reason, but some skills you never forget, even when you'd prefer to. The two police officers approached Lucas with caution. One was older with gray hair at his temples, and the other was younger, probably new to the force. They looked around the gas station, noting the small crowd that had gathered. "What happened here?" the older officer asked, his hand resting near his holster out of habit. Betty stepped forward. "Those road demons were harassing this young man, and they pulled a knife on him. He defended himself, and they took off when they heard your sirens." The younger officer looked skeptical. "You defended yourself against the road demons? All three of them?" Lucas nodded slightly. "Yes, sir. I didn't want any trouble. I was just passing through." The older officer studied Lucas carefully, taking in his MIT hoodie and glasses. "You must have some training, son." "Army," Lucas admitted quietly. "Special forces, but that was a while ago." Recognition dawned in the older officer's eyes. He had served in the military himself before joining the police force. "Well, that explains it. Those boys bit off more than they could chew." The man with the phone stepped forward again. "I have it all on video, officers. Those bikers started it. This guy was just defending himself." The younger officer took the phone and watched the video with his partner. They could clearly see the bikers surrounding Lucas, Wrench grabbing his hoodie, and then Lucas's efficient defensive moves. "That's some impressive technique," the older officer commented, handing the phone back. "Clean, controlled, no excessive force." Lucas shrugged. "I just wanted them to back off. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "Well, we've been trying to catch those three for weeks," the younger officer said. "They've been causing trouble all over the county. Would you be willing to file a report?" Lucas checked his watch. He was already behind schedule. "How long will it take?" "Not long. We can do it right here." As Lucas gave this statement, more customers began to fill the gas station, the normal flow of traffic resuming now that the road demons were gone. Betty had gone back inside to help customers, occasionally glancing out the window at Lucas talking with the police. After about 20 minutes, the officers finished taking his statement and the contact information for the witness with the video. "We'll keep an eye out for those three," the older officer said, handing Lucas his card. "But you might want to watch your back while you're in the area. Those guys don't take humiliation well." Lucas nodded. "I'm just passing through. Should be out of the state by tonight." "Smart move," the officer replied. "Where did you serve, if you don't mind me asking?" "Afghanistan mostly, sometime in Syria." The officer nodded with respect. "Thank you for your service. Stay safe on the road." As the police got back in their cars and drove away, Lucas finally made his way into the store. He needed that coffee now more than ever. Inside, he found Betty waiting for him behind the counter. "Your coffee's on the house," she said with a smile, handing him a large cup. "And these too." She placed a bag of donuts next to the coffee. "You don't have to do that," Lucas protested. "Those guys have been scaring away my customers for months. Nobody ever stood up to them before. It's the least I can do." Lucas accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. As he turned to leave, Betty added, "You know, they'll probably be back once they cool down and realize the police aren't looking for them right this minute." Lucas paused at the door. "You might want to keep that video your customer took, just in case." "Already got his number," Betty said with a smile, "but I'm more worried about you. They saw your car. They might try to follow you." Lucas took a sip of his coffee and gave her a small smile. "I think I can handle it, but thanks for the concern." As he walked back to his car, Lucas scanned the road in both directions. No sign of the bikers yet, but that didn't mean they were gone for good. Lucas pulled out of the gas station carefully, checking his mirrors more often than usual. The confrontation had left him feeling on edge, bringing back memories and instincts from his military days. He took a sip of the free coffee as he merged onto the highway, heading west toward his sister's place. After about 15 minutes of driving, Lucas began to relax. The highway stretched out before him, mostly empty except for a few trucks and cars. He turned on the radio, finding a station playing classic rock, and tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. Then he saw them. In his rearview mirror, 3 motorcycles appeared, gaining ground quickly. Lucas recognized the red flame details on the bikes immediately. The road demons had circled back and found him. So much for letting it go, Lucas muttered to himself, checking his speed. He was doing exactly the limit, minus 65 miles per hour. Going faster would only give the police a reason to pull him over, which would leave him vulnerable. The bikers drew closer until they were right behind his car. Wrench, in the lead, revved his engine aggressively. Lucas could see his angry face in the mirror, still red with humiliation from their earlier encounter. Lucas remained calm, assessing his options. The highway had 2 lanes in each direction with a grassy median in the middle. There was an exit about a mile ahead, but taking it might lead him into isolated areas where the bikers would have an advantage. Suddenly, Ponytail Guy accelerated and pulled alongside Lucas's car on the left. He grinned through the window, then swerved toward the car, forcing Lucas to jerk the wheel right to avoid being hit. "Not smart," Lucas said under his breath. The ball biker appeared on his right side now. They were boxing him in, with Wrench still on his tail. The bald one held something in his hand. Lucas caught a flash of metal. Another knife. Lucas had to make a decision fast. The bikers were coordinating their moves, clearly planning to force him off the road. He looked ahead and saw a semi-truck in the distance, moving slowly up a hill. Calculating quickly, Lucas suddenly hit his brakes. The move caught Wrench by surprise, forcing him to swerve to avoid hitting Lucas's car from behind. Lucas then floored the accelerator, shooting forward between the 2 bikers on either side before they could close the gap. 6 years of tactical driving courses, Lucas said to himself, not just combat training. The bikers recovered quickly, all 3 now in pursuit again. Lucas pushed his modest sedan to its limits, weaving through traffic as he approached the semi-truck. He passed it on the left, then immediately cut back to the right lane and slowed just enough to stay alongside the truck's trailer. The bikers split up, with Wrench and the bald one going left to pass the truck while Ponytail followed Lucas on the right. Lucas waited until the exact moment when the 2 bikers on the left were halfway past the truck, then accelerated hard again, putting the semi between him and 2 of his pursuers. Ponytail was still on his right, gesturing angrily. Lucas saw an exit ramp approaching fast and made another split-second decision. He waited until the last possible moment, then cut across to the exit ramp without signaling. Ponytail wasn't prepared for the sudden move and shot past the exit, cursing loudly. Lucas glanced in his rearview mirror to see the biker trying to slow down to make the exit, but he was going too fast. By the time Ponytail could turn around, Lucas would be long gone. The exit led to a small town with several streets and turns. Lucas navigated through it quickly, making random turns until he was confident he'd lost any possible tail. He found another entrance to the highway pointing west, but it was several miles from where he'd exited. As he merged back onto the highway, Lucas kept a vigilant eye on his mirrors. No sign of motorcycles. He had outsmarted them with driving skills they hadn't expected from a nerd. Lucas checked his GPS. Despite the detour, he was still on track to reach his sister's place before dark. He took another sip of his coffee, which had somehow survived the wild driving without spilling, and allowed himself a small smile. Lucas drove for another hour with no sign of the road demons. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His nerves had finally settled, and he was back to thinking about the coding problem that had occupied his mind before all the trouble started. As the daylight faded, Lucas spotted a small motel just off the highway. He had planned to drive through the night, but the confrontation with the bikers had left him more drained than he wanted to admit. A good night's rest would help him stay alert for the rest of his journey. The Blue Pine Motel was a simple place with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered. Lucas parked his car in front of the office and went inside to check in. The elderly man at the front desk barely looked up from his newspaper as Lucas paid for a room. "Just passing through?" the man asked, handing over a key with a plastic tag marked 8. "Yes, heading to Portland tomorrow," Lucas replied. Storm coming in overnight. Might want to get an early start." Lucas thanked him for the tip and returned to his car to drive around to room 8. The room was basic but clean: a bed, a small table with a lamp, and a bathroom with a shower that promised lukewarm water at best. Lucas set his overnight bag on the bed and drew the curtains closed. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "Where are you? Thought you'd be closer by now." Lucas typed back. "Got delayed. Staying at a motel tonight. We'll be there tomorrow afternoon." He debated whether to tell her about the incident at the gas station but decided against it. Sarah always worried about him too much, especially after he returned from his last appointment with nightmares that took months to fade. After a quick shower, Lucas sat on the edge of the bed and opened his laptop. He might as well get some work done on that algorithm before sleeping. As he typed, the familiar pattern of coding helped calm his mind completely. Around midnight, Lucas finally closed his laptop and got ready for bed. Just as he was about to turn off the lamp, he heard the rumble of motorcycle engines in the distance. His body tensed instantly. It could be anyone, he told himself. Plenty of people rode motorcycles, but something in his gut told him otherwise. Lucas moved silently to the window and carefully peered through a small gap in the curtains. 3 motorcycles were pulling into the motel parking lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Even in the dim light, he could make out the red flame details on the bikes. "Impossible," Lucas whispered. There was no way they could have tracked him here. He had been careful, taking random turns through that small town before getting back on the highway. Then he remembered his credit card. He had used the same card at the gas station and the motel. If the road demons had connections in the area, they might have found a way to track his purchases. The 3 bikers parked their motorcycles and gathered near the office. Lucas couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Wrench hand something to the night clerk who had replaced the elderly man. Money, probably. The clerk pointed toward the row of rooms, directly at room 8. Lucas moved quickly, gathering his essential belongings into his backpack. There was a bathroom window, small but big enough for him to squeeze through if necessary. But first, he had another idea. He took out his phone and called the local police, keeping his voice low. "I need to report 3 members of the Road Demons motorcycle gang at the Blue Pine Motel. They're armed and dangerous, with outstanding warrants." He gave the address and hung up before the dispatcher could ask for his name. Next, Lucas dialed the front desk of the motel. "This is room 8, he said when the clerk answered. 3 men are looking for me, and I believe they mean to harm me. I'm a former military service member, and I don't want any trouble at your establishment. Please tell them I've already checked out." Without waiting for a response, Lucas hung up and continued preparing. He positioned the furniture to slow down anyone coming through the door and placed his room key where he could grab it quickly. Then he waited, listening to the sounds of footsteps approaching outside. The footsteps outside room 8 stopped. Lucas stood perfectly still in the darkness, his back against the wall beside the door. He could hear muffled voices arguing. The bikers weren't being quiet about their plans. "The clerk says he checked out already," came a voice that sounded like the bald biker. "He's lying," Wrench responded. "I saw his car still parked around back. Blue sedan with out-of-state plates." Lucas silently cursed himself for not thinking about his car. He had been so focused on getting to his room safely that he'd forgotten how visible his vehicle would be. "Let's just kick the door in," Ponytail suggested. "Teach this guy he can't make fools of us and just drive away." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of someone testing the doorknob. Lucas held his breath. He had locked and chained the door, but a strong kick would break it open easily. Just then, the distant wail of police sirens cut through the night. The bikers outside fell silent. "Someone called the cops," the bald one said, panic in his voice. "We need to go." "No," Wrench insisted. "We have time. This won't take long." Lucas heard a heavy thud as someone slammed against the door. The wood creaked but held. Another thud, and the chain began to pull away from the frame. Lucas moved to plan B. He grabbed his backpack and slipped into the bathroom, quietly closing the door behind him. The window was small and high up on the wall, but it would have to do. He pushed it open and tossed his backpack through first. Behind him, he heard the main door finally give way with a loud crack. The bikers were inside his room. "Where is he?" Wrench shouted. Lucas boosted himself up to the bathroom window. It was a tight fit, but his lean frame made it possible. He squeezed through head first, using his arms to control his descent to the ground outside. As his feet cleared the window, he heard the bathroom door burst open. He dropped to the ground and rolled to his feet in one smooth motion, grabbing his backpack. He's outside. Ponytail yelled from the bathroom window. Lucas sprinted through the dark parking lot toward his car. The sirens were getting closer now, maybe just a minute away. If he could stall that long, the police would arrive. But Wrench and the bald biker had already run back outside and were cutting him off from his car. Lucas changed direction, heading toward the nearby woods instead. "You can't run forever, military boy," Wrench called after him. Lucas reached the edge of the trees and paused. Running into the woods at night was dangerous. He could easily trip or get lost. Instead, he turned to face his pursuers. They were silhouetted against the motel lights, approaching cautiously now. "This ends here," Lucas called to them, setting down his backpack. "The police are almost here. You still have time to leave." "Not without teaching you a lesson first," Wrench replied, pulling something from his pocket. The metal gleam of brass knuckles caught the motel's lights. The bald biker circled to Lucas's left while Ponytail appeared from the side of the building, attempting to flank him. Lucas stood his ground, falling back into a fighting stance that had become second nature during his years of training. Just as Wrench lunged forward, bright headlights flooded the area. 2 police cars pulled into the motel parking lot, their sirens blaring. "Police! Don't move!" an officer shouted through a loudspeaker. The 3 bikers froze, caught in the open. Wrench looked from Lucas to the police cars, calculating his chances. After a moment, he dropped the brass knuckles and raised his hands slowly. The other 2 bikers followed suit, their faces twisted with frustration and anger. As the police officers approached with weapons drawn, Lucas exhaled a long breath. It was finally over. An hour later, Lucas sat in the back of a police car, not under arrest, but giving his statement for the second time that day. He watched as the 3 bikers were handcuffed and placed in separate patrol cars. The officer taking his statement, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, closed her notebook. "They won't be bothering anyone for a while," she said. They had outstanding warrants in 3 counties. Lucas nodded. "Thank you." "No, thank you," she replied. "Not many people stand up to guys like that." Dawn was breaking as Lucas finally got back on the highway, continuing his journey west. The road stretched out before him, peaceful and empty in the early morning light. He rolled down his window, letting in the fresh air. His phone rang, his sister calling to check on him. "Hey, Sarah," he answered. "Yeah, I'm still on my way. Should be there by afternoon." He paused, then added with a small smile, "Just had an uneventful night at a motel. Nothing interesting to report." Some stories were better left untold.